Hi, this is TelecomTV. I'm Martin Warwick. We are in Germany, in Dusseldorf, at the SDN and OpenFlow World Congress, and I am talking with Stuart Bennington, Vice President Cloud and SDN Business Unit at Coriant. Stuart, thanks for talking to us. I haven't spoken to anyone from Coriant for a while, so let's start with the company. What's happening there now?
Well, Coriant has really been going through a transformation. We're a fairly new company when we brought the pieces together from Tel Labs and from the NSN Optical Group by
Sure.
Marlin Equity. And one of the really important foundations of our strategy going forward, and part of the excitement that we have around this show, is the announcement of an SDN and NFV portfolio called Transcend, which is really an underpinning of a lot of the strategic initiatives we're carrying forth with our customers. And so it's really comprised of a new suite of software products that are enabling some of the programmable capabilities in the network, but it's also enabling the existing products in our portfolio and bringing them forth into this next generation of functionality as these networks transform, as things become more cloud-centric, more application-centric. Then that's what's really driving this transition for us. In addition to that, we're also announcing a live enterprise service offering over our SDN product portfolio with a tier 1 operator in Asia. We believe this is really exciting because it demonstrates the maturity of where these technologies have come. SDN has maybe lagged a little bit from NFV as far as the timing goes, but we view those as highly complementary. They definitely address a lot of the needs that our customers have and really have the potential to affect their business models in a positive way, as well as the end users they're servicing.
Thank you. Well, look, cloud enables all of this. Technologies of NFV and SDN within the cloud are obviously vital and are changing the telecommunications commerce landscape completely. Part of it's come from the data center and is moving across into telecoms. You mentioned SDN perhaps hasn't quite had the same emphasis on it over the past months that NFV has, but for the operators, for the service providers, the benefit of NFV is evident immediately, because you can apply it and people know what it means and how it works. The technology is pretty secure and safe and settled, and they know how it works. SDN runs alongside that in parallel, but hasn't quite had the same emphasis on it. Now, you're an SDN specialist. Why is that?
I think a lot of it has been the transition that's taken place. As you mentioned, NFV, it's fairly straightforward. You have virtualization of appliances and software functions that are enabled by advancements in just common hardware platforms. SDN is a little bit, once you get outside of the network, outside of the data center, is a little bit more abstract in its value proposition, but we are seeing that really gain some traction for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, the applications are starting to become more, the network is starting to become more application-centric. In other words, in the past, you had a network and you had connectivity and so forth, and the usage from the end users had to conform to what the network can provide. With SDN and with NFV, you start to see the opposite. So you have a network that becomes programmable and adaptable based on this myriad of end user applications, different types of users. You have much better ability to monetize things. And it also addresses the operational environment. And this is really critical, especially as things like NFV ramps up. What is NFV doing? You're distributing intelligence, and you're detaching the intelligence from specific locations in the network and specific, let's say, vendor implementations and so forth. As a result, your network becomes a lot more flexible, and you can move those intelligent devices much more widely around. At the same time, the traffic patterns are becoming harder to predict. So SDN is a very natural complement to that, because it really enables the flexibility of the network to adapt in a way that makes it, without it, much more difficult to predict and to avoid congestion and things like that. It also enables the ability to monetize those assets in a way that's very specific to the end user. So if I have, let's say, a distributed application, let's say a packet core, and I can move that closer to the end user, so I have a better end user response and experience. But it also gives me closer visibility to the application over a mobile network, And as soon as I have that visibility to the application, I can do many different things with it. I can use that to have a variety of different protection mechanisms. I can use that to be customized for the willingness to pay from the end user. On the fixed side, for example, as new forms of video traffic, which is really the lion's share of traffic going over the network these days, I don't want to have dedicated connections always up all the time, especially as you get to 4K TV, for example, where you have the need for 100 meg just to have a non-compressed signal that's worth anything. I don't want to have that nailed up, but I want to be able to program that for when a user needs it and then turn it off when it's done. SDN's the only realistic way to do that. So we take a very cloud-centric and application-centric approach. In other words, focus on the end user and then help our customers make those networks adaptable to a new environment that responds to the needs of things without having to predict everything, most precisely, and by evolving in a way that can address all of the end user needs and all of the potential opportunities for the business model to expand for these operators.
Great explanation, Stuart. Thank you. Let's throw another one out there, another bone out there to chew on. A lot of SDN and NFV is predicated completely on the concept of openness. And openness, strangely enough, means different things to different folks.
Yes.
Openness to one isn't necessarily openness to another. Where does Coriant sit in that regard? Are you open? And what do you make of the proliferation of open standards bodies, open source bodies, all the opens, the daylights, the rest of it that we see around?
It's critically important to us. We've never been the biggest player on the block, and so in a way, there's a luxury in us knowing that you have to participate in an open ecosystem with an environment that leverages your strengths, but at the same time gives you the opportunity to participate with other vendor environments out there. So our orchestration solution, for example, is based on Open Daylight. We've spent a lot of time working through development communities to have open interfaces between our controllers, the orchestrators, the elements themselves, and the applications. For example, there was just the announcement at this show of the OIF and the ONF conveying their results from this interoperability testing that was going on, which we participated in. And it was really exciting from the standpoint that this is kind of the new model, that the way things are going in the future, sort of an open source IT style model of interoperability, rather than in the past where you had large standards bodies giving a dictate from on high, and it takes 2 years and then finally everybody approximates that interface. Rather, it was a bunch of people working together. Some of them were competitors of ours, some of them were customers of ours, some were complementary vendors in those environments, and you work on those interfaces, and we've tested with a variety of different orchestrators, with other connectivity players in the transport arena, and what resulted was a very effective multi-operator, multi-vendor test environment that spanned across multiple continents, and it really spoke to the power of the openness and how important it is for vendors to adhere to that openness. Another quick example is we announced today, along with NTT and some other university partnerships and so forth, the Safari project, which is part of the New Horizons 2020 EU initiative, as well as the initiative in Japan, which is an optical open orchestration environment. There's a lot of different pieces, but what we're doing is working with an NTT orchestrator, controlling the layer 0 and layer 1 functionality on our optical devices. So again, very different environment, achieving a lot of the same results, but again, speaking to the importance of openness and the breadth of opportunity that's out there if you embrace openness. So what we don't want to do with SDN or with NFV is to say, okay, here's the new wave of closed environments or open things that are masquerading as open environments. Rather, we truly want to get to openness, and that in a way we believe actually unlocks competitiveness. Like, people sometimes confuse openness with commoditization. We actually view that as quite the opposite. Openness promotes the arena of ideas, and if you believe you have intellectual property and you have core competencies that provide value to the customers and to the end users, we as a company embrace that, and we think that plays to our strengths, and that helps our customers succeed and drive business models.
A final question to you. It's been said that, mentioning orchestration, that NFV orchestration is a two-edged sword. It's a driver, and it's potentially an inhibitor as well, that the industry needs to overcome if NFV and SDN are going to realise their full potential, and operators and carriers are going to realise that for themselves and for their customers, enterprises, end users, etc. Do you agree with that?
Well, I guess I'd describe it this way. One of the things that, as this evolution moves forward, that we all have to be mindful of, and it's a balance, is striking the right balance between detailed specific functionality and prescriptive functionality,
yep,
and open abstraction. So open abstraction is great in principle. It has a very important role. The catch is that the more you abstract and the more you bring things up from dedicated functions on devices, the more you potentially can compromise specific, let's say primitives or specific functions on devices. So what you want to do is have a hierarchy of openness. At the same time, have functionality that plugs into open models, and so in that sense, you minimize the downside of abstraction and openness, and you maximize the leverage. For example, the optical layer is obviously a very important part of our portfolio, and it's fundamental to all the cloud connectivity. Virtually everything is optically connected these days. But the behavior of the optical layer is very specific, and there are specific parameters relative to analog loss budgets and coherent modulation and so forth that isn't easily NFV'd onto a server.
No.
So it's you're dealing with the physics of the world.
Yeah.
And you also, it's impractical to say that particular functionality can totally be detached from specific implementations, specific vendor implementations. Having said that in a way is a bit beside the point, because what you want to do is not necessarily have to make the orchestrator deal with all of that specifics. What you want to be able to do is to implement use cases. It all goes back to use cases. Where's the value being driven, and have the orchestrator be able to give instructions through, let's say, a transport controller to provide the performance and the capabilities necessary to enable those use cases in the most efficient and cost-effective way possible. And so that's the balance, and we think that there's a lot of good work that's been done there. We're very mindful of providing the most efficient connection mechanisms in this environment, but at the same time having an absolutely resolute commitment to this open pluggability and openness, because it just is going to be the new norm. And we see that environment happening in the data center. We see it when we talk to the cloud players and so forth, and it's going to be an imperative for the telcos, not just in the data center but in the network. And that boundary between the storage and compute resources and the network resources is breaking down, and there needs to be a binding of those three legs of the stool, as it were, because that's the end-to-end enablement of these applications, and that's where you drive the most value and best performance for this proliferation of end-user requirements going forward.
Good answer. Stuart Bennington, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.